Mornings in Maplewood Ridge began perfectly. Identical lawns, identical mailboxes, identical silence. The air was cool with a hint of spring moisture. The sun was just beginning to hit the houses, and in the distance there was the whir of automatic sprinklers. Sarah Ellington set out for a run at 6:03 a.m. She always started at the same time, wearing the same gray sneakers, with the same playlist in her headphones, playing without listening. The beat was more important than the music. The pulse was more important than the thoughts. The houses in this neighborhood resembled the set of a commercial. Freshly painted facades, perfectly symmetrical flower beds, cars parked at a precise angle. It was not customary to disturb the order here. It was not customary to breathe loudly here. But that was precisely why Sarah felt like an outsider here. Too upright, too real, too free. She was running along the inner ring when she spotted a figure standing by an SUV parked on the side of the road. A man in a security guard uniform, with sunglasses and a walkie-talkie slung over his shoulder. He stood with his arms crossed over his chest, apparently waiting. When Sarah reached him, he stepped forward and raised his hand. "Ma'am, please stop." Sarah pulled out one earphone without slowing down. "Sorry? You're breaking HOA rules. According to the neighborhood charter, jogging is allowed at 7 in the morning. It's 6:20 now." "So what? Did someone complain about the sound of my footsteps? Rules are rules, and you broke them." "Excuse me, who are you?" "HOA Security Officer Vince Barlow." "Security officer? What do you mean we have our own police officers now?" "I'm here to maintain order. This is private property, and I have the right." "You don't, because I live here. And until I'm officially banned from moving, I'll run whenever I want. I have a weapon, ma'am, and if you don't comply, I—" "What?" Sarah stopped, standing up straight. Taking off the other earphone, she looked at his face, calmly, without fear. "Straight. Repeat." "What did you say?" "I said that you must obey. Are you going to point a gun at me for running?" He jerked as if he was going to get a gun. It was real. She noticed that at first glance. But he was late. Her left hand worked faster than his thoughts. One movement, and the gun was on the pavement. A second, and his face was pressed against the trunk. A third, and her knee was pressed into the small of his back. "I'm calling the police," she said, pulling out her phone. "Not the HOA, the real police. Threatening someone with a weapon, unlawful detention, and also abuse of power." He tried to wriggle out. "Are you crazy? You are nobody. Neither the uniform nor the badge nor the weapon give you the right to threaten the residents. And if it wasn't me, if it was a girl with a stroller." There was a screech of tires. A patrol had pulled up. A real one. Two officers got out of the car. "You shouldn't let him go, ma'am. Only after you listen." One of them nodded. "We're already listening," Sarah told. Clearly, without emotion, just the facts. "I'm a veteran. I have reflexes, but I control them." He pointed his hand at the weapon. "I neutralized the threat. If you want, arrest him. But first, check who gave him permission to carry and use it." The officers looked at each other. One approached Vince. "Do you have a license?" I work for the HOA. It's their property." We asked, "Do you have a license?" "No. You are under arrest for illegal possession and threat to use a weapon." As Vince was led away, Sarah finally relaxed. She breathed deeply. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from tension. The neighbors started coming out of their houses, some with a cup of coffee, some in their pajamas. People watched silently. Some nodded. Some turned away. A woman of about 35 years old emerged from the crowd, holding a child in her arms. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not being afraid. We just got used to it." He came, spoke, demanded. We were silent. Silence is consent, and you can't agree with that. The woman nodded. Then she looked at Sarah's house. "You're probably staying for a long time?" "Yes, I just started." She returned home, took off her shoes, turned on the kettle. Through the window, she saw the police car drive away. Meanwhile, the sun was rising higher and higher. And on the streets that had seemed the same before, there was a feeling as if something had cracked here today. And it wasn't scary. It was necessary. The next day was surprisingly quiet. Too quiet. It was as if the neighborhood had gone quiet, sucked in the air, and was now waiting, watching house number 42. where the woman who had laid the security guard face down in the trunk the day before lived. Sarah woke up earlier than usual. She had a rhythm, a discipline instilled in her over the years, but this time she didn't run. She just sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee, watching the sun slowly spread over the fences and bushes. In her hand, a tablet open to the HOA bylaws, gray, dry, bureaucratic flesh. 117 pages of rules, restrictions, and requirements. It seemed like nothing to worry about, if you didn't know how exactly to use them. An SUV drove down the street, stopped in front of her, hesitated, drove away. Sarah didn't even glance, just noted, "Another one." An hour later, she changed and headed downtown for an emergency HOA meeting. There was no agenda, but she already knew. The meeting was held in a small columned building near a park. Inside, it was like a typical council chamber. A table, microphones, plastic chairs, a water cooler. On the walls were photographs of past chairmen, everyone in the same suit, everyone with the same smile. Sarah walked in silently. Several people turned, some nodded, some looked away. She sat in the third row next to a woman in a light sweater with a soft face. "You are the one," she whispered. "Sarah," she answered calmly. "Just Sarah. I'm Emily. I have 3 children. Last year, I was fined for leaving my bin by the road 20 minutes too long. A week later, I got a letter saying my facade was disturbing and negatively impacting the value of neighboring homes. And what did you do?" "I paid, because I didn't have the strength to fight. I'm alone, and they knew it." Sarah nodded. "Sonority, you are not alone." Carol Myers, the chairwoman of the board, walked into the room. She was wearing a peach suit, neat shoes, and her hair was styled with precision. She smiled at the room. "Good morning, dear neighbors. Thank you for taking the time to come. Today we will discuss issues of safety and maintaining order in our area. Yesterday there was an incident." "An incident?" Sarah asked out loud. Carol looked up, her intonation unbroken. "Yes. Unfortunately, one of the residents showed physical aggression towards a security officer hired by the HOA. We call for peaceful coexistence, respect for the rules." He pointed a gun at me. "That's a statement," Carol said softly. "It's a fact, recorded in the police report." There was an awkward silence. Someone coughed. Carol continued. "We do not want to turn our beautiful area into a place of discord. However, to avoid such situations, we will strengthen supervision. New rules will be introduced regarding movement, street noise, the appearance of the sites, for safety." "For control," Sarah said quietly. "Not for safety." "Sorry?" "You call this management. This is intimidation. You fine for the color of the curtains, for the height of the grass, for loud laughter on the porch. You do not have an HOA, you have a private dictatorship. If you have any complaints, you can put them in writing." Carol smiled slightly. "There is an established procedure." "I don't write complaints. I solve problems." The hall was noisy. People looked at each other. For the first time in a long time, someone said out loud what they were thinking silently. "Are you trying to start a riot here?" Carol looked straight ahead. "No, I want to remind you that we are not your property. We are neighbors, people, not pieces on a board." Sarah stood up. She left the room. The others stayed. But a few people stood up after her. Emily was among them. The street smelled of pine and spring. Sarah walked calmly. She knew that this was only the beginning. This system is not based on documents, but on fear. And as soon as fear goes away, so does power. And in her head, a plan was already forming. Cameras, recordings, dates, statements. Not a fight, not a brawl. An operation. Precise, methodical, cold. She looked at the sky and said quietly, "They don't know who they're dealing with, but they'll find out soon enough." As May approached, Maplewood Ridge seemed to slow down. Everything outside seemed smoother, quieter, as if the neighborhood was taking a breather. But inside the houses, the air was taut, like a thin fishing line about to be torn by the wind. People smiled on the sidewalks, but spoke in whispers. Flowers bloomed outside the windows, but they seemed to be placed there not for beauty, but as a barrier. Everything was too right, and Sarah felt it in every cell. She kept notes, every day. Who went where? Who approached whom? What time the SUV with the dark windows arrived? And what time Vince Barlow walked through the neighborhood, now in uniform but without his gun? His steps were a little more careful, but his eyes were the same, predatory, assessing. "He won't back down," Emily said one day, sitting on Sarah's porch with a mug of ginger tea. "Carol won't let him." "I didn't expect them to give in," Sarah replied calmly. "People like them only retreat when you take away their weapons, and their weapon is fear." She set up cameras, small, almost invisible ones. One under the mailbox, one in the light fixture above the door, one in a tree across from the HOA board. She didn't need to break the rules. She needed to record them breaking them. Within 2 weeks, she had a videotape of Vince ordering a new neighbor to be threatened for having the wrong flag on the porch, an audio recording of him saying, "Let's get them out. They're not the spirit," and a printout of letters in which Carol discussed cleaning up the street. Sarah had filed it all. She had filed it. She had numbered it. She had sent one copy through a journalist friend in Richmond. She had kept the second copy in the house. She had given the third to Emily. "If something happens to me, open up," she said. "Don't say that. Nothing will happen to you." Anything is possible, especially when the system is against you. That same evening, returning home from a walk, Sarah saw Vince standing at her gate. He was waiting. She didn't slow down. "It's a beautiful evening," he said, smiling. "What do you need?" "I want you to understand. You don't belong here. You're disrupting the harmony. Harmony based on coercion is not order. It is violence with a good haircut. You're in the wrong place. Everything is arranged here. People respect us. If they're afraid, that means they respect us. No, they are afraid. That means they live in a cage, and I break locks. You think you're a heroine? You're nobody, just another smart girl who thought she was smarter than everyone else. I don't think. I know. And you feel it." He took a step closer. "Make sure you don't regret it. You're already late, Vince. Everything you said is on tape." His face changed. His lips tightened. His fingers twitched. "You have no evidence." "Yes, and I've already sent them. But that's not what you should be afraid of." "Then what?" "That your power is ending. And you know it." She turned and walked into the house, not closing the door loudly, just smoothly, with dignity, leaving him outside alone, with trembling fingers and a face that for the first time showed not anger, but confusion. Later that night, Sarah sat down at her desk, turned on her laptop and hit send. The dossier went to 3 addresses: the local newspaper, a lawyer's office, and a non-profit that fights for tenants' rights. She knew the impact wouldn't be immediate, but it began. And in the morning, a strange note appeared on the notice board in the park. It was handwritten. "If you're afraid, you're not alone. If you've been silent, now you can speak. Some rules are made to be broken." Caption: "Someone who's tired too." 2 hours later, she was photographed and sent to the HOA chat. 4 hours later, she was deleted. 6 hours later, she appeared again. In 3 places now. Sarah smiled. The line trembled. And that was the beginning of movement. The park in the center of Maplewood Ridge that day looked like it was being prepared not for a celebration, but for a coup. The lawns were mown, the paths were swept, the stage was decorated with flags, but the air was not light and festive, but thick like before a thunderstorm. Around the perimeter were tables with apple pie, coffee, paper plates, and neat signs that read, "Veterans Appreciation Day." Above the stage hung a banner that read, "Remembrance, Strength, Honor." Everything was done with respect, but not for the sake of a checkmark, but for the sake of the moment when words were to be spoken, after which it would no longer be possible to pretend that nothing was happening. Sarah arrived early. In formal jeans, a simple dark blue sweater, with her hair pulled back into a ponytail. In her hands was a folder. On her face was silence, not cold, not distant, but confident, like a person who has nothing to prove. "He just does it." "Everything is ready," Emily whispered, coming up from the side. "The journalists are already there. Your friend from the newspaper is with a tape recorder. Over there, by the bench." "Good, and people?" "People come." But not as if it were a celebration, more as if it were a trial. "So we're doing everything right." Sarah walked up to the stage. The music stopped. Someone clapped. Someone stood up. The audience, if you could call those standing along the stage that, fell silent. "Good afternoon, neighbors," she began calmly. Today we have gathered to pay our respects to those who once took an oath to defend the country, not for the sake of politics, not for the sake of power, but for the sake of principle, for the sake of the people. I am not going to talk about myself, because this day is not about me. But while we are talking about honor, it is important to remember that it does not end outside the military base. It must live in our homes, in our streets, in our rules. Pause. Eyes in the audience did not move away. Over the past months, I have watched how rules in our neighborhood have become instruments of fear, how fines have become intimidation, how silence has become a weapon, and how a council created to help has become a structure of oppression. The word advice made several people tense up. Vince stood against a tree, arms crossed. Carol was in the front row, her face expressionless. I don't have any pretty speeches, but I have facts. She stepped aside. The newspaper reporter stood up, turned the microphone and began to read. Over the past 6 months, more than 20 Maplewood Ridge residents have been fined and threatened by HOA representatives for alleged violations. Parking a few inches too. Close to the curb, a facade that is too bright, a child playing ball in the yard. In most cases, there is no photo evidence, no formal notice, only verbal pressure and unfounded orders. All of these actions are related to verbal orders, captured on audio recordings. Here is a fragment. A recording played from the speaker. Vince's voice. This one needs to be clamped down on. He's noisy. And the one from the sixth one. Her husband left. She's weak. We need fines. First for the grass, then for the noise. Then she'll leave herself. A whisper went through the crowd. Someone gasped. Someone leaned forward. One more piece, some of the reporters said. Carol Myers, HOA chairwoman. We must have order. It cannot be that just anyone comes here. If they don't fit in, we will find a way. Through recommendations, through rules. We know how to manage properly. Sarah returned to the microphone, her voice unwavering. I'm not accusing, I'm showing, because now everyone knows it. And since we know, it means we can't remain silent. Carol stood up. This is a fake. These are cut recordings. This is a provocation. If you believe you have been slandered, Sarah replied calmly, you can file a lawsuit. I will be happy to provide all the materials to the official structures. In the meantime, the public has the right to know how it is being governed. Someone started clapping, then another, then dozens. The claps spread like rain on a roof. Carol was gone. Vince followed. A few council members remained, confused, as if they had forgotten how to walk. Emily walked up to Sarah and put her arm around her. You did it. You brought it all out. I just opened the window. The air came in by itself. In 2 days, the residents will meet again without the old council. They will vote to dissolve and begin the process of re-election. And today, for the first time in a long time, Maplewood Ridge was not just beautiful, it was real. The morning in Maplewood Ridge was surprisingly calm. No tension, no looking over one's shoulder, no shadows at fences. The light fell smoothly, softly on the porches of houses, and the light was honest, not through cracks, not in half tones, but open, as if the neighborhood itself had finally stopped hiding. The trees rustled calmly, not as before, warily. Even the grass seemed to grow more freely. People walked the streets not for show, not for the sake of order, but because they wanted to walk again. Sarah was kneeling in the flower bed in front of the house. She was wearing gardening gloves, a light cotton jumpsuit, her hair pulled back into a bun. She was planting sunflowers. Next to her was a bag of seeds, a sign that said, planted May 12th, and a metal trowel, scratched like a keepsake. She wasn't doing this for the picture. She was doing it for herself, for the silence that could finally be felt not as pressure, but as calm. The gate clicked. Sarah? She looked up. Emily was standing on the path, holding a thermos in one hand and a bag of cookies in the other, smiling, without a trace of worry. You're early. I wanted to bring you breakfast, or something like that. Sarah wiped her palms and took off her gloves. Come in. You are not a guest today. Today you are at home. They sat down on the steps. It smelled of earth, tea, and something new that had no name, but felt like the lightness between breaths. You know what's weird? Emily said, taking a sip. I suddenly realized I'm not afraid to go out in the yard anymore. Even if my hair is unstyled and the kid's ball rolled into the street, I don't feel like I'm being watched anymore. It's not strange. It's freedom. We've just lived without it for so long that it now seems unusual. Thank you for not giving up, for not leaving when it would have been easier to just leave. HOA, I thought about it many times, especially at night. But then I remembered faces. Yours. Those who were silent. I couldn't let silence win. That week, Maplewood residents held a general vote. The HOA board was officially dissolved. Carol was replaced by a young woman, a former accountant. Vince was gone. His house was sold. The curtains were drawn. No one saw him in the neighborhood again. The newspaper ran a story under the headline, "Neighbors Who Won't Quiet." No name, no photos, just the facts. That was enough. Later, a boy approached them, about 7 years old with a red lock of hair and a worn baseball in his hands. "Miss Ellington, Mom said you're the bravest one here. Is that true?" Sarah smiled. "No, I'm just the one who knew when to stop being silent. Can I put my flag next to your flowers? I have one from school, red, with an eagle." "Of course." "The sunflowers will be only happy." He ran toward the house. Sarah looked after him and said quietly, "This is victory, when children are not afraid to be themselves." In the evening, when the sun was already touching the treetops, Sarah sat on the veranda. On her lap was a book. Next to her was a mug with the remains of tea. The birds sang without fear. The houses stood like houses, not like walls. And people were walking along the path again, with dogs, with children, just like that. She looked at her street. Before there was a silence in it where control hid. Now there was a silence in which breathing could be heard. And in this silence, finally, there was a place for life, real life, without fines, without fear, without permission, only by right to be.